There were these helicopters flying over the ridge, spraying something, and they didn't even see the kids. That night, they were all really sick. We called the Forest Service, and they said, oh no, it's perfectly safe. It was a mixture of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, Agent Orange. And it's still going on.
And here he comes, I gotta reload him. This stuff is nasty stuff. My throat is burning.
Tumors, miscarriages, birth defects.
It was banned in Vietnam, and nobody realized that the same chemicals were being used here.
It was the most destructive instance of chemical warfare in modern history.
Je suis née pendant la guerre, je vis dans la guerre, et maintenant aussi on est en guerre.
The powers that be went to great lengths to deny any effect from Agent Orange.
They knew that it contained a poison, and they knew the effects could be devastating.
They sprayed people!
The attack is not scientific, it's purely emotional.
There was information that was withheld, distortions. It was tantamount to a cover-up.
Our phones were being tapped, documents disappearing.
We were being followed by guys in suits.
They said, you know at all times where your children are.
Je pense que peut-être on m'a donné une mission à accomplir.
This became a real David and Goliath act.
Somebody's gonna pay.
There was something going on.
How can something like that disappear?
I was getting so angry.
They had done the absolute worst thing anybody could do to me. They couldn't do any more.
Je consacre mes dernières forces pour que ça gagne, pour que justice soit faite.
A children's hospital in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. These children, and thousands like them, are still paying the price of the Vietnam War. In the 1960s, the American military sprayed more than 70 million liters of the herbicide known as Agent Orange over Vietnam, over a period of 9 years. Invisibly, it contaminated the soil, the fields, the rivers, and the people, and still does. Agent Orange contains one of the most poisonous variants of dioxin. A glass of it added to the drinking water of a major city like Berlin could wipe out the entire population. The effects of this toxic defoliant have long since ceased to be headline news, like the people of Vietnam themselves. We're accompanying the Red Cross on a visit to central Vietnam. The Ton Ha family lives here in a small remote village. The Red Cross estimates that there are 150,000 children in the province suffering from the after effects of Agent Orange. The sounds of a computer game as we enter the house. Hang is 16 years old. Born with disabilities, she's hardly ever been outside the family home. During the visit of the Red Cross workers, Hang suffers a severe epileptic attack. She needs extensive medical care, but the parents don't have the money. Hang's 11-year-old sister, Lim, also suffers from disabilities.
We are convinced that thousands of people are affected, both physically and mentally. They are victims of Agent Orange. In the name of peace, humanity, and friendship, we expect help in our plight.
Every day, the children's father visits the graveyard right behind his house. 12 of his children are buried here. They all died shortly after being born. He can't even afford proper graves. The United States government spends millions of dollars tracing American soldiers buried in Vietnam to bring their remains back home for burial. These graves are simply numbered.
It's a crime committed by the USA. I have no healthy children. The Americans sprayed chemicals on our country, and we were affected because we lived in this region and defended our country. When I returned from the war, my relatives and neighbors were very worried about what happened to us, but no one could help. In 1965, the United States intervened in the civil war between North and South Vietnam as an ally of the Western-oriented South. To flush the Viet Cong forces of the North out of the jungle, the USA used the defoliant Agent Orange. The US military mainly sprayed in South Vietnam. While I was fighting in the war, I was told to cover my face with a wet cloth to protect against the chemicals. When they sprayed the forests, my eyes watered, and I knew it was a chemical that was doing it. Sometimes there was no water to wet the cloth, so I peed on the cloth. That's how we survived. The deformities of the two surviving daughters have presumably been passed on genetically by the father because of the toxins in his body. The girls are at home all the time. Hang was in Hanoi once for an operation. They tried a neurological intervention in the brain to stop her epileptic attacks, but without success.
Chắc là có rồi. Vì đang đi học mà.
I'd really like to go to school with other children. I have no friends here. If there was just a school for children who are sick like me, that would be great. I'd go there like a shot.
Có một lớp nào mà dạy những người như cháu đây thì cũng tốt.
Hang's father tells us that his daughter often suffers from depression. She's often bored and afraid that she's going to die soon. For years, the Vietnamese government did not allow victims of Agent Orange to be filmed outside the cities. Now, though, it wants the world to see the devastating consequences of the contamination of the country. The Red Cross tells us about children with an extremely rare form of birth defect. This family lives a very secluded life. The two brothers, aged 15 and 17, can only move on all fours. Their sister and another brother have the same disability. The Red Cross doctors suspect the cause is a genetic defect brought about by Agent Orange. All four children are also mentally handicapped. The parents look after them on their own. There's no school for them, no hospital. The mother works in the family rice paddy. The father takes care of the children.
Like every father, I wanted my children to grow up healthy. But sadly, I didn't know I was contaminated with this poisonous chemical. I expect those responsible to do something for us. I won't live forever. And then, who'll take care of my children?
The fan hasn't worked for ages. The house is hot and oppressive. The warmth and openness of the children is very moving. The father is a Buddhist. People in this region of Vietnam used to believe that a handicapped child was a punishment for the bad lives of the forebears, but they've long since stopped thinking that. The father too knows that it's the toxins in his body and the contaminated land that are to blame. He's a victim of the dioxin that is spread through the food chain. Two of the brothers can manage to stand, but only with support and for a short time. All four children inherited their genetic defect from their father. But he wasn't in the jungle during the war, and he wasn't sprayed with Agent Orange.
We had nothing to eat at the end of the war, so I searched what had been the war zone for anything the Americans had left behind. I was often in the jungle for days, and I also drank from the river. I didn't know the whole area was contaminated. I just wanted to collect scrap from the war to sell. The after effects of Agent Orange are also to be found in areas that were never sprayed, like here in the north of Vietnam, in the province of Tay Binh. The reason? Many men and women fought in the south, in the sprayed region. They came back with toxins in their bodies. Now the people here are fighting on a different front. Nguyen Van Ky, a former soldier, wants justice for his children and is prepared to go all the way to America for it. In March 2004, together with other Vietnamese, he filed a claim in a federal court in New York for compensation from the chemical companies which produced Agent Orange. We are filing charges against the American chemical companies because our victims of Agent Orange lead a dreadful life. Who will look after my children when I'm dead? Both are disabled. I have enormous problems and just can't carry on like this. The war ended 30 years ago, but in my family it's still going on. In Tay Binh province, former soldiers have set up the Vietnamese Association for Victims of Agent Orange. The aim is to provide material, medical and legal support for the victims. In addition, they're claiming compensation from the American companies. The founding members are discussing whether they need more victim cases for their new class action lawsuit in New York. Mr. Ha represented the victims at the first hearing in America. At the time, he was still hoping for justice. But in March 2005, the first compensation suit was dismissed by a New York court on the grounds that a causal link between Agent Orange and disabilities could not be proved. At the same time, the chemical companies had paid $180 million compensation in an out-of-court settlement to US soldiers who had come into contact with Agent Orange. The Vietnamese didn't get a cent. We are determined to carry on through the courts until we get justice. We believe we can win. The American chemical concerns, which have illegally profited from the suffering of millions of people, must accept responsibility and pay damages. The legal setback in New York was a bitter blow for the association. The local mayor has come to urge the association to fight the chemical giants harder than ever. Justice will always triumph in the end, she says.
One affected family receives a present. Their home has been redecorated for them. A former colonel suggests recruiting new members for the association. It's striking that many families have more than one child with serious disabilities. That's the case with Mr. Ha's family. His 4 sons are deaf-mute. They also had a sister.
My daughter Hoti died of cancer when she was 5. She was a very pretty baby when she was born. She was so beautiful, like all newborn girls. But she couldn't open her eyes. She had an operation on her eyes, and then she could see, but she was deaf-mute like her brothers.
Why is it that there are so many victims of the chemical deployment even today? The US Army suspected the Vietnamese enemy was in the jungle and began to systematically strip the jungle of its foliage with chemicals. The justification was that this would save the lives of thousands of American soldiers. The defoliant used was called Agent Orange because it was stored in drums with orange stripes on them.
I was on dangerous missions in South Vietnam. I drove the truck at night and hid it during the day when I slept. We drank water from springs and ate fruit from the jungle. I knew nothing about Agent Orange, but I did notice the trees losing their leaves. I drove these missions for many years. Later I learned that the Americans had been spraying poisonous chemicals.
Mr. Ha does a lot of traveling, looking after the affected families. In rural areas in particular, many feel completely abandoned. It's always the same situation. The parents have too much to cope with. They're desperate, and the children suffer. It's a poor country, and medical provision is woefully inadequate. Another father is waiting for Mr. Ha. He's at his wit's end. His daughter Tam is 16 years old, and no one knows what's wrong with her. The local children don't play with her because their parents are afraid she could infect them.
Families like this one face a lot of difficulties. They have to devote all their energy to looking after the girl, to treating her and taking care of her needs. The parents would spend their last cent on medicine for their daughter. But the medicines they can get can only relieve the pain a little. They can't cure her.
The father is a broken man. He suffers from depression. His wife works the rice paddy.
My daughter will never get better. Tam will never be a happy girl. She needs constant care and attention. I've seen so many doctors. I've been to Hanoi too, a number of times. But the doctors all say the same thing. They can't help her. She'll have to live with it.
A stone's throw away in the same village, the next family is waiting. One more among so many. The father died some time ago. Mr. Ha has brought some basic medicaments with him. The daughter can't work because of her skin disease. They tell Mr. Ha their problems. Living alone without a husband is very hard for a woman in Vietnam. The mother receives a pension of just $5 a month.
I'm visiting this family because they need help and have no one else to turn to. The father was a soldier in the region sprayed with Agent Orange. He didn't survive long. The mother has to work in the rice fields to look after her daughter, even though she's old and ill herself.
This is everything the mother and daughter possess. The members of the association are former soldiers. As during the war, when they were pitted against an enemy of vastly superior strength, they're still having to fight with basic equipment, with no modern technology, no computers. Mr. Ha tells us about other victims' families. The association wants to prepare us for a particularly serious case. He shows us a picture to spare us the shock later. They tell us about a boy who's kept locked up by his parents because he's mentally ill. They don't let him go out. The two men with Mr. Ha were once highly decorated officers in the North Vietnamese army. They've been through a lot, but even today they're still confronted with things that shock them 30 years after the war. On the way to the young man, we picture him locked in his bedroom. But he doesn't live in his parents' house. He lives here. The young man's name is Hung.
This young man is psychologically disturbed and can be extremely aggressive. His parents can't cope. His legs are paralyzed, but his arms are very strong. He often attacks his parents and bites them. The family had no choice. They had to lock him up in a separate room.
The health system in Vietnam is in a desperate state. The country's economy is growing, but as far as health's concerned, there's great privation, especially in rural areas. In the town, the association's holding another meeting. I'm visiting Mr. Van Kie again. I'm hoping he'll accompany us, but he can't make it. He does talk about his feelings and hopes, though. He's been deeply scarred by what he's been through.
Why does the American government refuse to give us compensation? Why don't they care about the victims? Why won't the chemical concerns pay us anything? They made their profit, but countless victims of Agent Orange are living and suffering here today. They should pay us damages. Their behavior is immoral.
The founding members of the association are on the road again. Their campaign is reminiscent of the battle between David and Goliath. The former colonel introduces a woman who wants to be included in the class action lawsuit. She can't read or write, she's seriously ill, and she's ready to take on a major corporation. The association members are proud of her.
We represent the victims who have filed the suit against the chemical companies. They have money, and we haven't. They are powerful, but we are not weak. The rights of the victims must finally be recognized. We want justice.
The families affected in the rural areas are kept informed about the court case. Mr. Ha is visiting 16-year-old Tam again. She reminds him of his dead daughter. Had she lived, she'd be the same age as Tam. The girl is suffering from no clearly identifiable clinical syndrome, but from a combination of many symptoms. Mr. Ha is convinced that Tam's mother has a right to compensation. He explains how important the lawsuit is for securing the medical care Tam needs, as well as financial support. But the truth is that the court case will take a long time, even if it proves successful in the end. Will Tam live that long?
We won't give up until we've won. It's not just a humanitarian issue, but also a question of human rights. We will fight for that in the American court, not just for my child, but for her child and for all the victims of Agent Orange in Vietnam.
Healthy children for a change. We're in Ho Chi Minh City with its population of millions. The weather is hot and the air clogged with the exhaust fumes of the mopeds. We've come to the Tu Du Hospital. Mothers are taking their healthy children home with them, the lucky ones. Others will never be able to leave the hospital. "60 children live here. For some of them, life will be short. The after effects of Agent Orange are now evident in the third generation. So what's the situation like today? Are these children victims of Agent Orange?
We've carried out studies of the second and third generation living in the contaminated regions. In many instances, we found dioxin in the blood. There are areas that are still heavily contaminated with dioxin.
Thousands of children are still being born with dreadful defects. Agent Orange, an important issue within Vietnamese society. In Ho Chi Minh City, a benefit concert is held in aid of those affected. People are attending the concert out of solidarity. We're surprised to find a Catholic priest addressing the thousands of people attending this concert in communist Vietnam. He hopes the audience will enjoy the concert and asks them to support the victims of Agent Orange. And here comes the star of the evening. She says, if I don't sing well and you don't like my song, hard luck.
I myself was in the home run by the priest. I was very happy there. When I went back to my family, I was also happy because they love me and look after me. The neighbours also show me a lot of affection. I wish that all people with disabilities could be as happy and fortunate as I am.
Father Tu hands out leaflets about his children's home. He's been looking after many handicapped children there for the last 5 years and is asking for donations. We visit the Tien Phuoc Children's Home set up by Father Tu on the outskirts of Ho Chi Minh City. The needs of these children would not be met if it weren't for the priest. Some of them don't look sick, but appearances are deceptive. These 2 boys have no memory. When you show them a colour, they forget immediately which it was. They're not even aware that they have parents. It was in 2001 that the priest first took in a handicapped child. Over the years, more and more children have been brought to him. He now looks after 80 children with a wide range of disabilities. Most of them are victims of Agent Orange.
More children come every week. The parents are so desperate that they just leave the children on our doorstep at night. Most of them come from the area where Agent Orange was sprayed.
So many children arrived at the home that he's now set up another. Father Tu travels from one to the other several times a week. He set up the second home in the Cu Chi district. The land here was very cheap because it was intensively sprayed with poison by the US Army during the war. There are Agent Orange victims here from the 3rd generation since the war. According to the Vietnamese government, around 500,000 children were born with birth defects after the war. 2 million are suffering from cancer and other diseases. They are the victims of a chemical employed for the strategic destruction of plant life. But it also destroyed the lives of people. Foreigners sometimes come to help the priest look after the children. John is Australian. He fought on the American side in the Vietnam War. He too was exposed to the defoliant.
I was diagnosed with prostate cancer 1 year ago, and the Department of Veteran Affairs in Australia consider that this is possibly linked to contact with Agent Orange during my service in Vietnam. So I feel that there are many problems related to this chemical, and that especially the children need a lot of help here.
There are no doctors in the children's home. We see for ourselves what happens in an emergency. There's no ambulance available, so the child has to be taken to hospital on the moped. There's no time to lose. But in the rainy season, the journey is hard going.
Rồi.
It's not the first time that Father Tu has had to take a child to hospital. This child has no mother or father. The priest is the orphan's only attachment figure.
Cơ sở Thiên Phước ở Củ Chi.
The home is too far from the city where the doctors are. We can't cope. We need a doctor here in the home. In a serious emergency, we are too far away.
Nhưng cái điều bất lợi là xa với thành phố quá.
Vietnam has a population of around 82 million, of whom nearly 7 million are Catholic. After the war, the government was very distrustful of the Catholics. They were suspected of having collaborated with the Americans. The church was placed under strict surveillance and regimentation. There are around 700,000 Catholics living in Ho Chi Minh City, and their number is steadily increasing.
When the Americans left, I was one of the few Catholic Christians the party trusted. I was a bridge between the government and the Catholics in the country. A lot of problems have been cleared up in the meantime.
The party respected Father Tu because he had protested against the American occupation of his country during the war.
The communist government is opening up more and more, as are the Christians. Both sides have settled their differences over time. Relations between Christians and communists in the city have improved greatly. They've met us halfway, and we now work hand in hand with the government.
To support Father Tu in his work, the local authority has made a large plot of land available to him for a new home, the third for his children. But he has to finance it from donations. One local politician tells us that there are a particularly large number of children with disabilities in his district who desperately need a home.
The district authority took only 3 months to reach the decision to give Father Tu the land. It's very important he has the land so he can build a home there. The state itself prefers to invest in the rapidly growing economy. There's hardly any money for war victims. And for a long time, the government ignored the issue of disabilities caused by Agent Orange. The war belonged to the past. This is where the Catholic Church comes in. Father Tu has invited local politicians and business representatives to another benefit event. 4 children from Father Tu's home are performing at the concert to entertain the guests with their music. But what it's really about is the future problems of the country. The poison will not disappear for decades to come. The priest tells the audience that love for the children is all important. Only through love can we protect them. Pity doesn't help the children. They have to learn to fight for themselves. We won't always be here to help them, he says.
The priest is always anxious to boost the youngsters' confidence. Today is a special day. Father Tu helps Kong to fulfill his wish, a day out at the beach. Kong's brother is also here. A stroll on the beach helps them to learn how to support one another despite their disabilities. The priest's hope is that they'll one day be able to manage on their own, without him. The trip to the beach was a good distraction for the two boys. For the first time after many years in the home, they're back at their parents' house, though just for a visit. The family put the children in the home from necessity.
Xin gửi lại ông bà một chút để mà lo cho cháu Phước hả?
The parents of the two brothers had no possibility of looking after their sons at home. The boys know that too. They love their parents, but they understand that they can't live with them.
These chemical companies that have done such harm to our children make me furious. I hate these people who brought all this pain and destruction on us and who have left us in this misery. I hate these people who wanted to take over our country for no reason, who brought death to us, and we are left to make the best of it.
The Vietnamese government does not have the money to undertake large-scale soil sealing operations. Large areas of the country are actually not safe to live in. So 30 years after the end of the war, the toxins remain in the food chain. The victims will be dependent on others all their lives. No one can relieve their mental suffering, and all the money in the world can't change their fate. It's not possible to take the US government to court for having employed poisons in the war. The Vietnamese are hoping at least for an acknowledgement of responsibility. A neighbor comes by every day to teach the children. People help each other. This mother says that it's very hard for her to see her children suffering every day.
I don't know how much longer I can stand it. I've given up all hope.
When you're growing stuff at home, you need to give it it needs some love, a little more than just sun and water. You might use Miracle-Gro, right? Yeah, you might use a little bit of Miracle-Gro. But if you use a lot, what you are likely to do is to kill your plant. So in Vietnam, we had an issue. We could not see the ground. The leaves and the trees, everything, they were just too thick. And so to be able to see the ground, we needed to drop a chemical on those leaves. We dropped something that's frequently referred to as Agent Orange. Agent Orange has something in it called dioxin. Dioxin is a carcinogen. It's also found in cigarettes. What do carcinogens cause? Yeah, you said it. Say it again. Cancer. Carcinogens cause cancer. So we dropped Agent Orange. Agent Orange has dioxin. And when you're standing under it, it gets the leaves right off the trees. But if you're standing underneath it, it falls on your skin. You breathe it in through your nose. You breathe it in through your mouth. It gets all over you. And it also lands on the ground and it gets into the water system. And so for people who are standing beneath it, it made them very sick. And for U.S. service members who were interacting with it and transporting it, it also made them sick. Some of them got sick immediately when they came home, some of them later, and some of them are still dealing with the effects today. This was a man who was serving in Vietnam, and he was a sniper in the Army. He was injured and he lost his leg. And he always wanted his name to be on the wall. He had buddies on the wall. But for your name to be on the wall, you have to have died in that conflict zone in Southeast Asia. So his name could not be there. He came home and got really sick pretty quickly. He died in 1987. He was only 37. And he died from the effects of dioxin and from working and being around things like Agent Orange. When he died, he left behind a wife, a daughter named Keisha, who was 10, and a son named Ryan, who was 7. And when he died, his brother brought this leg down to the wall, and his brother left it with a note that said, I'm leaving this here in part for my closure, so I can remember the good times and forget the bad. He said that this is as close as I could get you to having your name on the wall. Guys, 2.7 million people served in Vietnam. All of those people who went there were affected in some way or another. They all left behind people who loved them, whether it was their mothers like Charles Stewart, whether it was wives or husbands. Many left behind children. Some their fathers or mothers came home and some they did not. So when we're looking at all of these items, they all are connected to the person they came from, but they're also all connected to families, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandfathers, grandparents, different pieces like that, and friends as well.